December 3rd, 2012. This is the ninth episode of the Revolutionary Journal. Today I would like to discuss the most recent conflict between Israel and Hamas. There's been a lot of media disinformation that's been flying around, and I would, using credible evidence, like to reverse some of that and to get out some of the facts. So let's start. The first myth about the fighting was how it started. We have heard that Israel's attack on Gaza was due to Hamas rocket fire. An example of this is in the Washington Times when Henry DeAndrea wrote that, quote, Operation Pillar of Cloud has Israel once more defending its own people from continued missile strikes out of Gaza. This was Israel's primary exposition in starting the operation and killing Hamas terror chief Ahmed Jabri. Jabri was the latest aggressor in opposing Israel, putting the lives of Israeli citizens in harm's way. Unquote. However, statements such as these are false on a number of levels. Let's keep in mind that Israel's Operation Pillar of Defense started on November 15th. However, the violence began earlier. On November 8th, it was reported that Israel killed a 13-year-old Palestinian boy during a clash between Palestinian militants and Israeli forces. Reuters reported, quote, the Popular Resistance Committee, a militant group, said its gunmen had confronted an Israeli force of 4 tanks and a bulldozer involved in a short-range incursion beyond Israel's border fence with the Gaza Strip. Terrorists opened fire at IDF soldiers while they were performing routine activity adjacent to the security fence, an Israeli military spokesman said in Jerusalem. An Israeli military official said the soldiers responded by firing at suspicious locations. Palestinian medics said the boy, aged 12, was hit by machine gun fire either from Israeli helicopters or tanks that took part in the incident. 2 days later, it was reported that, quote, an Israeli tank killed 4 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip on Saturday after militants blew up an Israeli jeep with an anti-missile tank, wounding 4 soldiers. Palestinian rocket fighters retaliated by firing rockets into southern Israel. An Israeli airstrike targeted a rocket crew, killing a Palestinian militant, the Israeli army said. Unquote. And it was also reported that 1 Palestinian civilian was killed and dozens more wounded in Israeli attacks. 4 Israeli civilians were also injured as a result of projectiles launched from Gaza, according to the Israeli government. As we can see, the aggression was not started by Hamas rocket fire, but just by general conflict of both sides fighting with one another. However, the final spark that created the Rocky Inferno was on November 14th, when Israel assassinated Hamas commander Ahmed Jabri. It must be noted that Haaretz reported, quote, hours before strongman Ahmed Jabri was assassinated, he received the draft of a permanent truce agreement with Israel, which included mechanisms for maintaining a ceasefire in the case of a flare-up between Israel and factions in the Gaza Strip. This, according to Israeli peace activist Gershon Baskin, who helped mediate between Israel and Hamas the deal to release Gilad Shalit, and has since maintained a relationship with Hamas leaders. Baskin told Haaretz on Thursday that senior officials in Israel knew about his contacts with Hamas, Egyptian intelligence, aimed at formulating the permanent truce, but nevertheless approved the assassination. Unquote. We have to keep in mind that Mr. Jabri was very much against Israel in its existence. However, it's quite strange that the Israeli government, who consistently says that wants nothing but peace, will then go and assassinate Hamas leader when both parties are right in the middle of peace talks, to say the least. After that, the fighting between Israeli and Palestinian militants escalated to the point where Israel launches Operation Pillar of Defense. By the end of the approximately 8-day operation, 100 Gazans and 3 Israeli civilians would be dead. I'd like to take a moment to go and talk about the problems with both the Israeli and Palestinian governments. I wrote in a recent article that, quote, at the heart of the matter, the conflict is not between the Israeli people and Gazans, but rather is between a small minority on both sides that has its interests in taking advantage of situations of fear and desperation to shore up support for themselves. Like in many conflicts over history, the problems violence, and destruction are caused not by problems between the people, problems between the governments or ruling bodies. I find this to be quite true, as the people that suffer are not the leaders of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, or the Israeli government. Rather, the people that aren't covered in the news, whose names will virtually never be known. I think that the problem can only be solved when the people put demands on their governments for peace, but it seems that both the Palestinian militant groups and the Israeli government will continue fighting no matter what. Looking at the aftermath of the conflict, while Israel may have inflicted more damage on Gaza, in the end, it lost to Hamas. The real purpose of going to war is to fulfill one's political objectives. If one cannot do that, then they have lost the war. For more information, let's go to The Economist. The Economist recently published an article entitled An Old Dawn, in which it was stated that, quote, Hamas cadres have a particular reason to celebrate. For over 6 years, Israel, the region, and Western powers, led by the United States, have tried to bypass a movement that won the 2006 elections. Unlike the ceasefire that ended Israel's 2009 offensive, its terms include an end to Israeli incursions, the restoration of civilian life, and what Israel calls its buffer zone. Hillary Clinton promised to help Gaza without insisting that the aid go through the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. No one mentioned the conditions laid down by the Quartet of America, Russia, the European Union, and the UN for dealing with Hamas. Even members of the Israeli government admitted that Israel built in schools for Operation Polar Defense. The Jerusalem Post quoted Kadima chairman Shoal Mofaz as saying, the goals of this operation were not reached. The next round is only a matter of time. And also saying, we should not have stopped at the stage. Hamas got stronger. We did not gain deterrence. And finally, Mofaz stated, the army knows how to do its work, and we could have won this time. A ceasefire at this point is a mistake. That is not how a war against terror ends. Hamas has the upper hand. So we even have the Kadima chairman admitting it, that Hamas won this round, this battle, of conflict. And I think that's very important because we consistently go and we think of war in the context of body counts and okay, if I kill you more, more people than the other guy, then I'm winning. Like I said, war is extremely political. The only reason you go to war is for political reasons. You can be having a war, winning the war militarily, but politically losing. A really ongoing example of this is the war in Afghanistan. The Western forces are in there, and militarily speaking, they are winning. Every time the Taliban fight them, the Taliban gets slaughtered. However, politically, they're losing because the Karzai regime, which they set up, their backing is corrupt. The people of Afghanistan don't trust them. That government doesn't have any real power beyond Kabul, and a lot of people are really just turned to the Taliban because while Taliban might be brutal, but at least they know justice is going to be meted out fairly. So, war is political. Period. War is political. However, due to this Hamas victory, there have been some serious political ramifications. But for that, let's go to CNN.
However crude the calculation, especially amid the civilian casualties, there are winners and losers in this truce, and they are already reshaping political alliances in the region. We begin in Egypt, and its president, Mohamed Morsi, clearly underestimated. His deft handling of what is a minefield of competing interests has given him much-needed political capital in both the Arab world and the United States.
First civilian president in Egypt, perceived as a weak leader, has, much to everyone's surprise, delivered.
Then there's Israel and its tenacious Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. After Israel targeted and killed Hamas's military leader, he launched airstrikes hitting more than 1,500 targets in Gaza, dismantling some of Hamas's arsenal of weapons. And Israel had a successful combat debut of Iron Dome, the U.S.-funded defense shield that kept dozens of rockets from hitting Israeli civilians. But the counterpoint to that is ironic. Hamas emerges as a big winner from this conflict and its truce.
But Hamas has emerged stronger. It's consolidated its control over Gaza, and it has gained now more legitimacy.
In the eyes of the Palestinian people, the militant leaders of Gaza took on Israel more boldly than ever before, firing rockets further than ever before. And they may yet manage to get an easing of the Gaza blockade if a more comprehensive deal can be done.
Look what they've accomplished. They, rather than Abbas, has put the Palestinian issue back on the international stage.
And that brings us to those who have lost much in this conflict. Mahmoud Abbas and his Fatah faction. The Palestinian leaders were supposed to be the moderate peace brokers. Now they can't even claim to speak for all Palestinians and proved they have no leverage with Hamas, their arch-rival.
This is not a good outcome for Abbas, and it's not a good outcome for the pursuit of a two-state solution.
And always a player, Iran's hand is arguably weakened after this episode. Iron Dome shot hundreds of his missiles out of the sky. What if Israel attacks Iran? Can it still call on Hamas to retaliate? In 1 week, with one truce, allies and enemies in the region have shifted again. And this will have an impact on any peace negotiations going forward. Paula Newton, CNN, Atlanta.
For all the mainstream media attention, there were several things that were ignored by the mainstream media. So as usual, I had to go to the alternative media to get a better perspective. On November 20th, Phil Sadovsky, professor of economics at Ottawa University, wrote an article which stated that, quote, "What is significant in assessing U.S. involvement in Operation Pillar of Cloud is the fact that in the month prior to the attacks, the U.S. and Israel were involved in the conduct of the largest joint war games in Israeli history. The objective of the war games was to test Israel's missile air defense system against attacks from far and near, namely from Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas." Later in the article he states, quote, "In the context of the war games, Hamas and Hezbollah are identified as nearby enemies and allies of Iran. The joint exercise is simulating the possibility of wide-ranging rocket fire on Israel, both from nearby enemies and more distant ones, the possibility of war with Iran and Hezbollah." And this is quite important for two reasons. One, because it shows that Operation Pillar of Cloud really was used kind of as a exercise for a possible war with Iran. Dostoevsky even states that the war games kind of went live during Operation Pillar of Cloud. However, it's also important because the call to war with Iran has once again come back up. That options come back up, especially with the recent AP report, which stated that Iran is attempting to build a nuclear weapon. However, this was found to be utterly, completely wrong by USA Today and Glenn Greenwald, among others. Even had in the USA Today article that it was a computer simulation, but the AP was going and trying to push it as if, oh no, they are, the Iranians are trying to make a nuclear weapon, and oh, are we going to have to go with Iran? Go to war with Iran? No. It was completely false, and was really surprising because a lot of people, myself included, told the AP as a pretty neutral source. Usually to go to them and you get the facts, but in this case, they seems that I'd have to say it's a little bit more than a mess up. It's a computer simulation. They aren't trying to get the nukes, it's a computer simulation. You're going to try and say that they are trying to get a nuclear weapon. That's a pretty big accusation. But back to the ongoing story. Um, Now, changing gears now. Most recently, the UN passed a resolution in which Palestine was granted non-member observer state status, giving it de facto recognition as a state. The manner in which the UN voted signaled a massive shift in world feelings about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's a wake-up call to Israel to realize that people are beginning to shift away from their ending support of Israel. The Israeli government, incensed by this, reacted by announcing that they were going to build more settlements on the West Bank. They were going to hold back more than 100 million in taxes owed to the Palestinian Authority, use that money to pay down the debt owed to Israeli companies. However, there's much more at stake. Let's turn to Dan Efron over at the Daily Beast. He penned an article explaining that Israel's reaction to the UN's vote on the resolution, uh, which was, quote, also a recognition of their right to all the West Bank and Gaza, including territory that Israelis have settled since 1967, unquote. Um, he said about it that, quote, one fear is that Palestinians will use their new statehood designation to gain membership in the International Criminal Court at The Hague, where they could have charges brought against Israelis over the recent killings of civilians in Gaza, for example. Even the expansion of settlements in the West Bank could trigger indictments, according to A.L. Gross, expert on international law at Tel Aviv University. The issue hinges on whether the ICC's chief prosecutor accepts the UN vote as criterion for Palestinian statehood. Gross says, I think it potentially is a bad deal, end quote. Thus the changes for Palestine are rather dramatic. However, one should not place much hope in the International Criminal Court, at least in my opinion, as it doesn't have much power to enforce its rulings unless the US and its allies want to. For evidence is to how quickly they convicted and swept up members of the Gaddafi regime, while against the well documented crimes the government of Bahrain committed against its civilians while the Arab Spring was going on. Um, this also has ramifications for the UN, um, as funding from the US may very well end. We only need to look last year at UNESCO when the US pulled funding from that organization for recognizing Palestine. However, the most shaking um, ramification rather, is that due to Israel, a contiguous Palestinian state may not even be possible. 972 magazine reports that E1, derived from East 1, is a term applied by the Ministry of Housing to an area located just east of the Jerusalem municipal boundary, hills of, of Ma'ale Adumim in Jerusalem. It lies north of the Jerusalem Ma'ale Adumim Road and the edges the Palestinian towns of Anada, Abu Dis, Azariah, and El Zayim. E1, which covers some 12 square kilometers, is part of the planning area of Ma'ale Adumim. The main artery between the northern and southern West Bank runs through E1. That is very important, as uh, the New York Times stated that Daniel C. Kurtzer, a former American ambassador to Israel and Egypt, said that, quote, the United States repeatedly has warned Israel not to build in the area abutting East Jerusalem known as E1, where settlements there would effectively bisect the West Bank and could do in plans to create a contiguous Palestinian state, end quote. Israel has recently decided to increase the settlement amount by 3,000 in this area defined as E1 and refuses to bow to international pressure, as the Palestinian state itself is at risk. Is very important because the manner in which state is defined. The state, political science defined as the uh, monopoly of violence. State, whatever group has a monopoly of violence is the state. However, in geographical terms, do you need it needs to be a contiguous state. A contiguous state, you need borders, you need airspace, and the like to consider it a state. However, due to these settlements, Palestine will never be able to be an actual state. You know, um, may not ever be able to be an actual state due to these settlements, and that's a major problem because then they aren't going to be able to. Well, they already haven't been able to really do anything about the Israeli aggression. But then they definitely never really be able to do anything because it won't fit that specific definition, and it may seem very kind of foolish, but that's just the way things work. Things are defined. So that's a major problem, and it seems unfortunately that this is going to continue, and the problems and conflicts are going to continue. There's not going to be a peaceful solution. That's all I have to say. See you next week.